No one expected the truth to begin on such an ordinary Sunday night in Portland, when soft rain tapped against the windows and the house felt warm but strangely heavy, and Emily Carter stood alone in the kitchen staring at her phone as if it were about to change her life. She had always been the calm one in the family, the aunt who remembered birthdays, who mailed graduation cards with handwritten notes, who baked apple pie for every holiday, and to her 19-year-old nephew Jacob, who was staying with her and his uncle Daniel for the summer before returning to college in Seattle, she seemed steady and kind and unshakable, but that night her hands trembled as a message lit up her screen again. "We can't keep pretending this isn't real," it read, and the name under it, Mark Reynolds, made her chest tighten. Mark was not a stranger, he was someone from long ago, from her college days in Chicago, someone who once knew her dreams before marriage, before routine, before quiet disappointments settled into her bones, and months earlier they had reconnected online in the most innocent way, sharing old photos and laughing about professors they once disliked, but slowly the conversation shifted from memories to confessions, from jokes to late-night honesty, and Mark began asking questions Daniel hadn't asked in years. Are you happy? Do you feel seen? Do you still paint like you used to? And each question felt like a door opening in a room she had locked for too long. That night Daniel was still at work, delayed again by meetings, and Jacob was at the dining table with headphones on, typing an essay, unaware that just down the hall his aunt was fighting a battle inside her heart, because she knew she had crossed a line, not with actions but with feelings, and feelings were powerful enough. The phone buzzed again, and before she could stop herself she pressed call, her breath shallow, her voice low so no one would hear, and when Mark answered there was warmth in his tone that made her close her eyes. "Emily," he said softly, as if her name carried history, and she felt tears rush forward without warning because she was tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of sitting across from her husband at dinner talking only about bills and weather, tired of going to bed beside someone who felt miles away even when their shoulders touched. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered quickly, pacing the kitchen tile, her free hand gripping the counter for support, and in that moment Jacob pushed back his chair in the dining room, having heard the strain in her voice through the quiet house, and stepped into the hallway, confused, because he had never heard his aunt sound so fragile. "What do you mean?" Mark asked gently, and she pressed her lips together, fighting emotion. "I care about you," she admitted, the words trembling in the air, "but I'm married, and this isn't right." There was silence on the other end, heavy and real, and she felt both relief and heartbreak at once, because part of her wanted him to argue, to tell her love should be followed no matter the cost, but another part knew she had already gone too far in her thoughts. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she continued, tears slipping down her cheeks now, especially Daniel. "He may not see me the way he used to, but he's my husband." In the hallway Jacob froze when he heard that, his heart pounding as confusion spread across his face, because the idea that his aunt, steady, loyal Emily, could be talking about another man shook him deeply, and yet the pain in her voice made him hesitate before judging. "Maybe we just found each other at the wrong time," Mark said quietly, and that sentence broke something inside her because it sounded like a door closing on a life she had briefly imagined, one where she felt heard again, where laughter came easily, where someone noticed the way she still tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous. "Goodbye, Mark," she said finally, forcing strength into her voice, and she ended the call before she could change her mind, placing the phone face down on the counter as if it were dangerous. For a moment she simply stood there, breathing hard, staring at the rain outside, trying to calm the storm inside her chest, and when she turned around she saw Jacob standing in the hallway, eyes wide, shock written clearly across his face. "Aunt Emily," he asked slowly, unsure whether to step closer or walk away, and she felt her stomach drop because she realized he had heard enough to understand. "You shouldn't have heard that," she said softly, wiping her cheeks quickly, trying to regain the composed image he had always known, but the mask had slipped and there was no putting it back fully. "Are you okay?" Jacob asked, his voice no longer that of a child but of a young man trying to understand adult problems too heavy for him, and she wanted to protect him from the truth yet also felt strangely relieved that someone had finally seen her struggle. The house suddenly felt smaller, the air tighter, as if secrets had taken up physical space between them, and in the distance the sound of thunder rolled across the sky while headlights flashed briefly through the front window, Daniel's car turning onto the street, almost home. Emily's pulse quickened because she knew the quiet balance of her life had shifted in those few minutes, and Jacob sensed it too, standing there caught between innocence and awareness, realizing that adulthood was not as simple as he once believed. She picked up her phone again, staring at the dark screen, understanding that choices made in silence still carried weight, and though nothing physical had happened, something emotional had cracked open, something that could not be ignored anymore. As the garage door began to rise with a mechanical hum, Emily inhaled deeply, straightened her shoulders, and looked at her nephew with a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that the secret he had just overheard would force her to confront truths she had been avoiding for months, and Jacob, still stunned, had no idea that this rainy Sunday night was the beginning of a conversation that would change how he saw love, marriage, and honesty forever. The kitchen felt smaller after Daniel's car pulled into the garage, and Jacob stood frozen in the hallway while Emily quickly washed her face and tried to steady her breathing, but nothing could erase what he had heard, and when Daniel walked in with his usual tired smile and set his keys on the counter, the air between the three of them felt tight, like a secret was sitting at the table waiting to be named. Dinner moved in slow motion, plates clinking too loudly, small talk sounding forced, and Jacob kept stealing glances at his aunt, noticing how she barely touched her food, how her eyes seemed distant even when she nodded at something Daniel said about a new project at work. After they finished eating and Daniel went upstairs to change, Jacob remained in the kitchen, drying dishes that were already dry, and when Emily reached for a glass their hands almost bumped, and she knew the moment had come. "You heard more than I wanted you to," she said quietly, not looking at him at first, and Jacob swallowed, unsure how to respond because part of him felt confused and another part felt protective. "I didn't mean to listen," he replied, his voice steady but cautious, "but I couldn't ignore it either." Emily nodded slowly, appreciating his honesty, and for a few seconds neither of them spoke, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. She had always been the adult in his life, the one who gave advice about college applications and first heartbreaks, but now she felt exposed, almost fragile in front of him. "It wasn't what you think," she began, then paused because she knew that sounded like an excuse, or maybe it was exactly what you think, just not in the worst way. Jacob leaned against the counter, folding his arms, trying to process the idea that his aunt could be emotionally involved with someone else. "Are you in love with him?" he asked carefully, the question simple but heavy. Emily closed her eyes briefly because she had asked herself the same thing many nights. "I don't know if it's love," she admitted, "but I know it made me feel noticed." That word hung in the air, noticed, and Jacob's expression softened slightly because he could see the loneliness behind her calm face. She explained how she and Mark had reconnected months ago through social media, how it started with harmless messages about the past, how it slowly turned into long talks about dreams, regrets, and quiet disappointments, and how she began waiting for his texts in a way that scared her. "Your uncle isn't a bad man," she said quickly, defending Daniel even now. "He works hard, he provides, he's loyal, but somewhere along the way we stopped really seeing each other." Jacob listened without interrupting, realizing this wasn't a dramatic scandal but something more complicated and sad. "Why didn't you just tell Uncle Daniel you were unhappy?" he asked. Emily gave a small, tired smile. "Because sometimes you don't notice the distance until it feels normal, and then you're afraid that saying it out loud will break everything." She told him about the quiet dinners, the way conversations had become practical instead of personal, the way she missed laughing with her husband about nothing at all, and how Mark's attention felt like sunlight after a long winter. "But it was still wrong," she added firmly, her voice stronger now, "because I'm married, and emotional secrets can hurt just as much as real ones." Jacob felt torn. He had grown up believing marriage was solid, unshakable, and seeing cracks in it unsettled him, yet watching his aunt struggle made him realize adults carried hidden battles too. "So what happens now?" he asked. Emily glanced toward the stairs, knowing Daniel was just a few rooms away. "Now I have to decide who I want to be," she said quietly. "Someone who hides and drifts away, or someone who faces the truth?" The weight of that choice pressed on her shoulders, and Jacob saw something brave forming beneath her fear. "Are you going to leave Uncle Daniel?" he asked, the thought making his chest tighten because despite everything, he loved the stability of their home. Emily shook her head slowly. I don't want to run, she said. I want to understand why I felt this way in the first place. She explained that the call Jacob overheard was her trying to step back, trying to stop the emotional connection before it went further, because deep down she knew she still cared about her marriage, even if it felt faded. Feelings don't just disappear when you ignore them, she said, they grow in quiet places. Jacob thought about his own short relationships at college, how quickly misunderstandings could create distance, and he realized how much more complex a long marriage must be. I was shocked, he admitted, looking down at the counter. I always thought you and Uncle Daniel were perfect. Emily let out a soft laugh, not bitter but honest. No one is perfect, Jacob. We just learn how to hide our struggles better. The sound of footsteps upstairs reminded them that time was moving forward whether they were ready or not, and Emily felt a sudden clarity settle over her. You weren't supposed to see this side of me, she said gently, but maybe it's not a bad thing that you did. Jacob looked up, surprised. Why? She met his eyes with quiet strength. Because real love isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about choosing honesty even when it's uncomfortable. In that moment, Jacob saw his aunt not as a flawless adult but as a woman trying to protect her marriage from a mistake before it grew larger, and the shock he felt earlier slowly shifted into understanding. Emily took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and dried her hands on a towel as if preparing for something important. I can't keep this inside, she said more to herself than to him. If I want my marriage to survive, it has to be built on truth. Jacob nodded slowly, sensing that whatever happened next would shape more than just their summer. It would shape how he viewed commitment, loyalty, and courage. As Daniel's voice called from upstairs asking if anyone had seen his blue folder, Emily straightened her posture and looked at her nephew one last time before stepping toward the stairs, and Jacob stood there in the quiet kitchen, realizing that adulthood was not about never making mistakes but about facing them before they turn into something that can't be repaired. Dinner ended but the tension stayed, thick and heavy in the quiet Portland house, and Jacob felt it in every small sound: the scrape of Daniel's chair, the running water in the sink, the steady ticking of the wall clock, while Emily stood still for a long second, drying her hands on a towel as if preparing for something far bigger than a simple conversation. Daniel walked back into the kitchen holding his blue folder, smiling faintly, unaware that the calm routine of his evening was about to shift. Everything okay? He asked casually, glancing between his wife and nephew, sensing something but not yet understanding it. Jacob felt his chest tighten because he knew what was coming, yet he stayed silent, stepping back toward the hallway. Emily inhaled slowly, her heart pounding so loudly she thought they might hear it. Daniel, she said, her voice steady but firm, we need to talk. The words landed softly but carried weight, and Daniel's smile faded into confusion. About what? He asked, placing the folder on the counter. Emily looked at him directly, not angry, not accusing, just honest. About us. The room fell into a silence that felt endless. Jacob quietly moved toward the stairs but didn't go all the way up. He sat halfway, close enough to hear voices but far enough to give them space, his mind racing. Down in the kitchen, Daniel crossed his arms, defensive without meaning to be. What's wrong? He asked, a hint of worry entering his tone. Emily swallowed, forcing herself not to soften the truth. I've been feeling lonely, she said simply. Daniel blinked, surprised. Lonely? We live in the same house. That's not what I mean, she replied gently. We share space, but we don't share much else anymore. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Where is this coming from? She paused only a second before continuing. I reconnected with someone from my past. The confession hung in the air like fragile glass. Daniel's face changed instantly, shock, hurt, disbelief all mixing together. Someone from your past, he repeated slowly. Emily nodded. An old college friend. We started talking online months ago. Daniel took a step back as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Are you telling me you've been seeing someone? His voice wasn't loud, but it trembled. "No," Emily said quickly. "Nothing physical." But the conversations became emotional. Too emotional. The word emotional seemed to strike harder than anything else. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what he was hearing. "Did you fall in love with him?" he asked quietly. Emily hesitated because the answer wasn't simple. "I felt something," she admitted. "Not because he's better than you, but because he listened." Daniel looked wounded, and for the first time Jacob saw his uncle not as the strong, steady adult but as a man afraid of losing something important. "I work every day for this family," Daniel said, his voice tight. "I thought that was enough." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't step back. "I know you do. And I appreciate it. But I needed more than security. I needed connection." The word connection echoed between them. Daniel leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, softer now. "Because I didn't know." "How?" she replied. "I didn't want to sound ungrateful. I didn't want to hurt you." And then it became easier to talk to someone who wasn't part of our daily routine. Daniel shook his head slowly, pain clear on his face. "So what now? Are you leaving?" That question hit harder than anything else. Upstairs on the steps, Jacob held his breath. Emily stepped closer to her husband, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "No. I ended it tonight." Daniel looked up, searching her face for doubt. "You ended it?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Because I don't want a fantasy. I want to fix what we have." Daniel's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "Why would you stay after feeling something for someone else?" he asked. Emily answered without hesitation. "Because love isn't just about feelings that appear suddenly. It's about the life we built. The years. The promises. I almost forgot that." The honesty in her tone filled the kitchen with something raw but real. Daniel walked to the window, staring out at the rain, thinking about the distance that had quietly grown between them over time: late nights at work, cancelled vacations, conversations cut short by phones and deadlines. "I didn't see it happening," he admitted quietly. "I thought we were fine." Emily stepped beside him. "We weren't terrible. We were just drifting." Daniel turned toward her, his voice no longer defensive but vulnerable. "Did he make you happier than I do?" Emily shook her head slowly. "He made me feel heard." "That's different." Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't sharp, it was thoughtful. Daniel's eyes softened. "I never meant to make you feel invisible," he said. "I guess I got comfortable." Emily nodded. "So did I." The truth between them felt painful yet strangely relieving, like finally opening a window in a stuffy room. Jacob listened from the stairs, his earlier shock transforming into something else: respect. He expected yelling, blame, maybe even slammed doors, but instead he heard two adults facing something difficult without cruelty. Daniel took a deep breath. "If we're going to fix this," he said slowly, "we both have to change." Emily agreed. "I'm ready to try." Daniel looked at her wedding ring, then at his own, as if seeing them clearly for the first time in years. "No more secrets," he said. "No more silence," she replied. In that simple exchange, something shifted. The problem wasn't solved, the hurt wasn't erased, but the wall between them cracked open enough for light to enter. Daniel reached for her hand, not dramatically, not perfectly, but honestly, and she squeezed it back. On the stairs, Jacob exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He had expected disaster, but instead he witnessed courage. His aunt hadn't run toward excitement or hidden behind lies, she had stepped into discomfort and chosen transparency. As the rain outside began to slow, the kitchen no longer felt like a place of secrets but a place of reckoning, and Jacob understood that what shocked him most was not the emotional mistake, but the bold decision to confront it head-on, because sometimes the strongest move in love is not walking away when things get hard, but standing still long enough to rebuild what almost broke. The weeks after that honest night did not feel magical or easy, but they felt real, and that alone changed the energy inside the Carter home, because instead of quiet tension hiding behind polite smiles, there were open talks, long pauses, and sometimes uncomfortable truth spoken without anger, and Jacob noticed the difference immediately as he watched his aunt and uncle move through their days with a new awareness of each other. Emily kept her promise first. The morning after the confession, she sat alone at the kitchen table with her coffee, typed one final message to Mark thanking him for reminding her what it felt like to be heard but telling him clearly that she was choosing to repair her marriage, and when she pressed send and blocked his number, her hands trembled yet her heart felt lighter, because the door she had almost stepped through was now firmly closed. It hurt, more than she expected, but she understood that temporary excitement could not replace years of shared history, and when Daniel walked into the kitchen that morning instead of avoiding her eyes, he sat down across from her and asked, "How are you feeling?" And that simple question, asked with sincerity, marked the beginning of something new. They did not pretend the hurt was gone. Daniel admitted he felt wounded and insecure, wondering what he had missed, and Emily admitted she still felt lonely at times, afraid the old routine might slowly return, but instead of shutting down, they listened to each other carefully, like two people rediscovering a language they once spoke fluently. Daniel began coming home earlier when he could, not out of fear but effort, and he started leaving his phone in another room during dinner, choosing presence over distraction, while Emily made space for honest talks instead of bottling up frustration, and sometimes those conversations were awkward, sometimes emotional, yet each one built a small bridge across the distance that had grown between them. Jacob observed quietly, surprised by how fragile yet strong marriage seemed, because he had grown up believing love either worked smoothly or fell apart completely, but now he saw that it required maintenance, attention, and courage. One evening he walked into the living room and found his aunt and uncle looking through an old photo album, laughing at a picture from their first apartment in Chicago, and the sound of that shared laughter felt different from the polite exchanges he had heard before. It was warmer, lighter, almost hopeful. Still, not every day was bright, and there were moments when Daniel's mind drifted back to the fact that another man had once filled the space he should have filled, and during those times he grew quiet, but instead of turning that silence into resentment, he voiced it gently, and Emily reassured him not with excuses but with steady commitment, reminding him that she had chosen to stay, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Slowly trust began to grow again, not as a sudden wave but as a steady rhythm, and Jacob realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting but about deciding the future was more important than the mistake. As summer moved toward its end and Jacob prepared to return to Seattle for his second year of college, he found himself thinking differently about relationships, less certain that love was a simple feeling and more aware that it was a daily decision. On his last weekend at the house, the three of them sat on the back porch under a clear sky, the rain of that dramatic Sunday long gone, and Daniel reached for Emily's hand without hesitation, their fingers fitting together naturally, and Jacob noticed the comfort in that gesture, not flashy or dramatic but steady. "I was scared that night," Jacob admitted quietly, looking at his aunt. "I thought everything was falling apart." Emily smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both past pain and present strength. "Sometimes things have to crack open so you can see what needs fixing," she replied. Daniel nodded beside her. "We got too comfortable," he said honestly. "We stopped choosing each other." The phrase stayed with Jacob because it sounded simple yet powerful, choosing each other. Before leaving for college, he hugged his aunt tightly, feeling grateful not for perfection but for the lesson she had unknowingly given him, and he realized that what shocked him most was not that she had felt drawn to someone else, but that she had faced that truth and turned back toward her marriage instead of running from it. Months later, as autumn leaves covered the streets and life settled into a calmer rhythm, the Carter home felt warmer again, not because it was flawless but because it was honest, and Emily often thought about how close she had come to losing something valuable simply because she felt unseen, yet instead of letting that loneliness guide her into secrecy, she had allowed it to lead her into conversation. Daniel, for his part, never forgot the wake-up call. He understood that love could fade quietly if ignored, and he made a habit of small, consistent acts of attention: morning coffee made before she woke up, evening walks around the block, simple questions about her day that invited real answers. Their marriage did not become a fairy tale, but it became intentional, and that intention strengthened it more than any perfect image ever could. Jacob carried the memory of that summer with him into adulthood, telling no one about the private struggle he had witnessed but holding on to the understanding that relationships require bravery, humility, and truth. And whenever he faced his own doubts in future relationships, he remembered his aunt standing in that kitchen choosing honesty over escape, choosing repair over excitement, and he understood that the night that once shocked him had not destroyed his belief in love but deepened it. Because he saw that real commitment is not about never feeling tempted or lonely, but about facing those feelings with integrity and deciding, again and again, to protect the promises that matter most.